Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Daisy. Today, I will be reading my subscribers' spooky stories. So grab your snacks, grab your favorite blanket, and let's get straight into it. Hi Daisy, my name is Rebecca, and I have many paranormal stories, either from myself, my family, or my friends. Usually, these scary stories all take place in Mexico. I'm going to tell you about an encounter that my family and I had 3 years ago with what we believe was a witch. My family is from a small rancho in Jalisco, Mexico, which is 3 to 4 hours away from Guadalajara. In my rancho, there are women who are brujas and practice brujeria. We're not exactly sure who the brujas are, but a few of my cousins said that they had seen one of the eldest women either turn into a crow with red eyes or come back from being a crow. I know I've heard stories from different parts of Mexico that these specific women are called lechuzas, but I've also heard that they're called by different names. Now, I believe that I had an encounter with a bruja. It was the summer of 2021 in my rancho. We host fiestas in June, so I was at my rancho with my family celebrating. On a calm night, a couple of days after the festivities had finally calmed down, my cousin, sister, and I were playing some card games at the kitchen table when my little cousin suddenly said we should tell scary stories, especially about the bruja. Of course, me being a scaredy cat, told him that we shouldn't because it was night and we wouldn't be able to sleep. There is also a superstition in my rancho that either on Tuesday or Wednesday we shouldn't speak of brujeria or talk about it because those are the days when the brujas do their brujeria. Right after I said no to his suggestion, we heard a goat crying. We thought it was one of the goats my uncle had next door. All of my cousins and I looked confused. It was midnight, and usually most animals are asleep by then. Why would any of them be crying? My mum and my aunt were outside folding clothes that they were going to sell the next morning at the nearby market, and they were closer to where the goat cried. The thing is, the house I was staying at is next to the mescal fields, and we were also surrounded by the hills where the mountains are. All of us heard the goat cries from the fields, which was weird because my uncle's goats were all in a small pen. The strange thing about the goat cry was that it sounded distorted. It didn't sound like a regular goat. It sounded almost human-like. I knew immediately what it was, but tried to keep my cool. The house grew quiet as we listened to the goat crying, but then it stopped. That's when my mom and aunt came inside because they thought maybe it was a coyote or a snake killing a goat. Or maybe a goat was accidentally tied up, choking itself, which could be true, but it didn't feel like that. They immediately closed all the windows and doors and turned off some of the lights in the house. They told us to be quiet, and we all were waiting to hear the goat cry again. But it never came back. After what seemed like a while, one of my little cousins went to the window, staring at the fields where we heard the goat cry. He swore he saw glowing red eyes in the dark of the fields. My aunt said it must be fireflies since in June there are fireflies. He disagreed. My cousin is a paranoid kid, so I thought he was exaggerating. But then he said to his mum. His mum replied, "But we didn't have a TV." I figured maybe it was someone else's TV from the neighbours, as we all live pretty close together. After what seemed like a long time, one of my cousins needed to head home because it was getting late. So my mum had my sister and 2 boy cousins take him home safely. My little cousin, the one who wanted to talk about the RAS, came up to me and asked, "Do you think it was the Buey because I talked about them?" I looked at him and said, "No, it can't be," just so I wouldn't scare him, even though I knew it could have been one of them. since I've heard that BR has liked to mimic animal noises to lure people to their traps. I'm not sure how we managed to go to bed that night, but we all slept soundly. The next morning, we were ready to go and sell at the Theos. So my mum went to check on my Theos goats, and they were all fine. No blood, no tracks, nothing. So what could it have been? Was it really AA? During the rest of my stay in Mexico, some things continued to happen. For example, I would wake up super early in the morning, hearing little footsteps on the roof and giggling. People say those are the Wendy's, but I brush it off and say it's probably Iana's. Usually, that's the extent of what I would experience, just giggling from time to time. To this day, nothing else paranormal has happened when I'm in Mexico. And I think it's because that same summer my mum had the house blessed by the bee. This story takes place in Marcan, Mexico, where my family is from. My mum told me about it when I was around 10 or 13 years old. It's about her uncle who loved to drink with his friends. He was about 20 or 30 years old at the time. One night, as usual, he and his friends were drinking and getting ready to either go home or grab more beer. In the area where this story takes place, there was a large patch of trees, almost like a forest, but not too big. People avoided that path because it was said to be haunted. That night, though, my mum's uncle, drunk and feeling confident, decided to walk through it. He said that as he entered the path, it was eerily foggy and completely deserted. No one, nothing around. While walking, he saw a woman in a wedding dress standing with her back towards him. Curious and maybe a bit reckless due to the alcohol, he started calling out to her, saying things like, "Is that Sola?" But the woman didn't respond, and then he yelled, "Andara, show me your face!" That's when she turned, and what he saw wasn't human. Her body was, but her face, it was the face of a dead, bloody pig. Terrified, my mum's uncle ran as fast as he could, not to where he was originally headed, but straight to his parents' house. When he got there, he was frantic, shaking with fear. That night, he was so scared that he slept in the same bed as his mum and dad, unable to sleep at all. From that point on, my mum said her uncle was never the same. He slowly lost his mind and eventually died. After that, no one dared to walk through that path in the rancho alone. If they did, it was always during the day and in groups, carrying weapons for protection. Even though I don't live in Mexico, the thought of seeing the bride with a pig's face terrifies me. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Stories, so I thought I'd share one of my many experiences my family has gone through. I've changed names to keep everything confidential. My mother Maria and her sister Sylvia once told me about a time their sister Ma was possessed after playing with the Ouija board. This happened in western Mexico, where my family was born and raised. Maria said it all started when Maribel was gifted a Ouija board by a friend. For several days, she would stay in her room playing with her friends in the dark. However, eventually, her friends stopped coming, and Maribel continued to play on her own, always at the same time, with the door shut and the room dark. Maria and Sylvia both remember hearing strange noises coming from Maribel's room, sounds they had never heard before. Maribel started looking ill and irritable. Maribel seemed to get worse as the days went on. Worried about her, Maria went to their mother and told her about the IGA board. Their mother scolded Maribel, and told her she needed to throw it away. Maribel agreed, but instead of getting rid of it, she hid the board under her bed. Maria and Sylvia would still see her secretly pull it out to play. The noises continued, and only grew louder and more disturbing. Maria described it as if there was a monster under Maribel's bed. The girl finally went to their mother again, this time in desperation. When she heard the noises herself, their mother was horrified. She quickly gathered the girls to sit in prayer. Maria said she couldn't remember how long they prayed, but eventually the noises stopped. Relieved, they thought they had gotten rid of whatever evil was lurking. But as soon as they stopped praying, they heard another noise, this time from outside the house. Maria described it as the sound of chains being dragged and a carriage circling the home. She said the entire home began to shake. They were all terrified. They rushed to Maribel's room, and what they found was deeply disturbing. Maribel was smiling but began to hit herself, punching her face and stomach. She scratched herself until she drew blood, all while speaking a language that sounded like a Mexican dialect, one they didn't understand. My mother said that she had heard native people speak a similar dialect, but she and her sisters only knew Spanish. Maribel's voice grew louder, deeper, and filled with pure anger. The family tried to hold her down to stop her from hurting herself, but she was far too strong for the three of them. My mother, Sylvia, and my grandmother began to pray again, this time for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, the sunlight came out, and Maribel finally calmed down and fell asleep. My grandmother left Maria and Sylvia to watch over her as she went into town to seek help. When my grandmother returned, she was accompanied by a tall man with an old yellow book and a large cross on his shirt. She told Maria that this man something was seriously affecting the environment. She said no. Why? I asked. Don't you feel that? I genuinely thought everyone else was feeling what I was experiencing, but no one did. Then the bus slowed down just as the sensation intensified. I saw an open space with what appeared to be an old church in the distance and buildings surrounding it. My prophet said, "Look." I was barely able to focus, but he explained that in 1968, hundreds of student protesters were gunned down by military forces at this location. As the bus kept going further and further away, I began feeling better. I knew it had been the negative energy of the area. On the way back later that day, I could again sense when we were nearing the plaza, because the same electric charge filled the atmosphere as we passed by. The last experience I'll share took place when I visited the home of Frida Kahlo in Coyoacán, Mexico. Frida was a famous painter, and I had always been fascinated by her work and life story. On one of my weekend explorations, I went to the Frida Kahlo Museum, which had been her former home and was preserved as it was during her lifetime. I believe this was where she spent the last years of her life, sick and crippled, until her death. The house was kept as it was back then, with her things still in place. It was truly a beautiful home, painted in the most vibrant blue I had ever seen. I walked through the rooms, listening to the tour guide, but as the tour progressed, I felt increasingly sad. By the time I left her bedroom and reached the patio, I was sobbing uncontrollably. I was overwhelmed with a sense of intense sadness and depression, unlike anything I had ever experienced. I didn't want to live in those moments. I felt like I wanted to die. I don't remember exactly who walked me back outside, but someone helped me get out of the house. Just like the Museum of Torture, the moment I was back on the street, I felt completely fine. It was so bizarre. I knew then that I had felt Frida's pain. On another occasion, I was driving with my roommate. She stopped the car to show me a house that had belonged to Diego Rivera, Frida's evil, narcissistic husband and a famous painter. The house looked like a blackstone fortress with tiny windows high up in the walls, resembling a prison tower. It terrified me, and I begged her to keep driving. For weeks afterward, I had disturbing dreams about that fortress. These may not be the scariest stories, but they were unsettling for my story. Hola! I recently watched the latest Zen video. It took me back to an experience my family and I had when I was 12 years old. My 5-year-old brother began waking up around 2 or 3 in the morning, terrified and crying, trying to leave the apartment. He kept saying that there were little men offering him toy cars. Scared of them, he would tell them no, but they kept following him. We watched him try to run out of the apartment, but we couldn't see the little men he was talking about. This continued for about a week until my mother confided in one of our neighbours. Our neighbour asked if we had recently been near a forest or a body of water. My mother mentioned that we had gone to a river in Meakin a few weeks earlier. A neighbour told her that Lendys were trying to take my brother's soul and that they had followed us from the forest. So we adjusted. We hung a picture of the guardian angel above his bed and kept the Bible open to a certain scripture. And we prayed every night before he went to sleep, and whenever he woke up in the middle of the night. So that's what we did. I say we because I would wake up to help my mother, and eventually I started waking up on my own to pray. After 5 nights of this, it worked. My mother later said that she should have known this would happen. She recalled how my grandmother had warned her when we were at the river that there were Lendys there. My grandmother had to sit quietly by the river to hear the Lendys throwing rocks into the water. Honestly, I didn't remember this detail until my mum brought it up. My brother, now in his 30s, doesn't remember anything about what happened. After this experience, I started having countless other paranormal encounters. I found out years later that one of my mum's aunts was a witch and worked with Lendys in her practices. I have so many experiences that I sometimes hesitate to share them, fearing that people won't believe. So, that was it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you to everyone that shared in their spooky stories. These stories really spooked me out, so wish me luck because I had to edit these, and I edit at night. So, wish me luck. But if you have a spooky story that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to send it in at daisies.spooks@gmail.com. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel because we have spooky vibes all year round. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys are all doing well, doing amazing, and I hope to see you guys all in my next one.